Hello, I'm Jeff Scheidock, Dean of Students at Calvin Theological Seminary, and recently I was honored to host a conversation between Mark Braverman and Gary Burge about Israel and Palestine and about the ongoing violence in Gaza. Mark Braverman is a Jewish American with family roots in Israel. He's a retired clinical psychologist. He serves as the executive director of Kairos USA, a movement to unify and mobilize American Christians to work for a just peace in Israel and Palestine. Gary Burge is an adjunct professor of New Testament here at Calvin Theological Seminary, and he's an expert on the integration of theology and politics in the Middle East. When individuals and groups experience violence and abuse, there's a danger of adopting a posture of victimhood. In this part of their conversation, Mark and Gary address the effects of victimhood on the situation in Israel and Palestine today.
Mark, can I go back to Gaza for a moment? And since this is so hot right now in the news, I'm troubled by one thing, and help me here, okay? I want to talk about victimhood. So maybe you can help us understand how deeply entrenched is being a victim inside of Jewish consciousness. And how does that play out? How is that feeding what's going on right now in Gaza? Okay, help us with that. And then on the Palestinian side, has a parallel victimhood kind of settled on the Palestinians? Now, when you have people who have sustained this strong sense of victimhood for a very long time, what happens? What kind of distortions set up in your life? Can you no longer see the other as human? Can you no longer see the other as friend? But everybody becomes foe. Yeah. Just play with that a bit, because maybe that explains a part of the deep ugliness of what's happening right now.
Of course. You're asking really important, profound questions, Gary. So to the first one, yes, victimhood, to my sorrow, is deeply entrenched in Jewish identity. I grew up with it.
What did it sound like as a child to you?
It sounded like the Goyim, the Gentiles out there, what we call the non-Jewish world.
Because everybody who's not a Jew is a Goyim.
Is a Goy. And a Goy, and I got this directly from my grandmother who grew up in Europe, early in the 20th century. The Goyim were an ignorant, drunken rabble that wanted to kill you. So there's a certain amount of superiority and exceptionalism, a brittle one, built into that sense of victimhood. We have been their victims. We will be their victims no more, not in the United States of America, and then later, not in Israel. It's very toxic. I think one of the reasons why I became a psychologist was I was working through the toxicity and the pathology of that kind of identity and self-image that was built into me very subtly, very indirectly, but very, very powerfully. So it separated me from the rest of the world. It gave me the sense of superiority, but also isolation. It was not good. And I think that plays out very, very strongly in Zionism. And Israeli Jews are taught from the cradle that the world out there is hostile, trust no one. It's one of the hallmark symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which I think we suffer from in an unresolved state. Trust no one. We will protect you. So it's the strongman thing. Cue Netanyahu, cue Donald Trump, through cue Adolf Hitler, or any demagogue who rises to power. All of that toxic stuff is in there.
Okay, so how does that come into your consciousness? I mean, is it the recital of the Esther story in Purim and the Exodus story about the Egyptians?
It's a genocide story.
And it moves all the way through the pogroms in Russia. It moves all the way to the Holocaust. And then the requisite visiting of Yad Vashem, the great Israeli Holocaust Memorial in West Jerusalem. The necessary visits by school children into that.
Yes.
Are all these...
And soldiers have to go through that.
Soldiers too. Very disturbing experience. I've done it probably 5 times.
Yes.
And so so there's a consistent tapestry woven here that goes from Exodus to Holocaust.
Literally, I mean, you can see charts, school curricula for elementary school that it explains Jewish history. And it starts with Pharaoh, and it goes through the pogroms, and goes through Hitler, and then it ends with Abdul Nasser and Arab nationalism, and then to Ahmadinejad in Tehran.
Yeah.
And it's literally there. And now the Palestinians, and that's why we have Israel. It's literally spelled out and indoctrinated in children in Israel.
So in some sense, that does then fuel this remarkable reaction, which has happened after October 7, that it's not just we want the hostages back and we are going to eliminate Hamas.
We have to wipe them out.
We have to wipe.
Before they wipe us out.
Yeah.
Even though it's totally irrational. There's no way Hamas is going to wipe out Israel's superpower with its nuclear arsenal. But it's not rational, Gary.
Yeah.
So now you asked the other question was, what about the Palestinians?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Now, up to now, I would have said psychologically and sociologically, the real victims of this story are the Jews of Israel, who are behind this psychological wall that which is not only physical but a psychological wall of racism and hatred and paranoia. As a psychologist, I understand that. And the Palestinians are victims of dispossession, but they know who they are, and they have not learned to hate. Now, there have been suicide bombings over time, but nothing to the extent which have provided the pretext of, and the fake rockets from Gaza could do no damage until up to now, because they're coming directly from Iran, of course, and Hezbollah.
Yeah. So Gaza has really increased its capacity for doing harm.
Of course. I mean, little Gaza, they barely have food to eat.
Yeah.
And they smuggle stuff in on tunnels from Egypt. You don't smuggle in that kind of material that way, in any case. But they know who they are, and they haven't lost their souls, if I can use that language. But I've always also said, if the Jews, who were the victims of the world, once empowered, could turn around and start to do this, then God help the Palestinians if they get empowered, because what they will turn around to do. So the savage violence that was visited on Israel on October 7th, people could only do that if they did not regard their victims as not human.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's what's happened.
Yeah.
Finally, over generations, to those Palestinians. So that's a horrible, horrible tragedy. I have people in the West Bank still, Christians who I work with very, very closely, and others who, as far as I know, are not there. Certainly I know the Christians are not there. They are lamenting. But I am hearing words from them now and a tone from them now that is changing. I'm hearing a sense of desperation, a loss of hope that is deeply, deeply disturbing.
Yeah, I'm hearing the same. I spent Sunday afternoon an hour on the phone with one of my friends in the West Bank, and it's just
a Palestinian.
Yeah, Palestinian Christian. Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure he was okay with his family. He's got his entire family, all of his kids, married, all hunkered down in the same house. And they're frightened. They're frightened. And I hear the very same change in tone. I guess that leads to a state of despair. I mean, if you've got two parties here, which are both viewing themselves as deep victims, and you have just toxic levels of anger beginning to surface, already surfacing among Jews, I guess, and then now among Palestinians. Where does that go? That's what's the end of the road here? And I think we'd all would say, well, violence doesn't remove anger. It generates more anger.
Sure.
So
you can't kill the beast. You can't kill the resistance by trying to kill resistance.
Yeah, or you can't bomb people into passivity.
This was one part of the conversation between Mark and Gary. If you'd like to hear more, you can click on the next part of the conversation, or you can click on the full conversation.